Chapter 2. We're not doing all of Chapter 2. We're doing the important stuff in Chapter 2 combined with Chapter 1. The important stuff of Chapter 2 is to talk about gains from trade, a little bit about the trading system, how things work. These two guys on our screen, the guy on the far right is Adam Smith. We've seen him before. 1776, Wealth of Nations. The guy to his left is a man named David Ricardo. Published his book in 1815. And it's from these two guys that we changed our whole theory of how trade worked. Before these two gentlemen, economists believed that whenever there was a trade, and it didn't matter whether it was between two people or between two countries, whenever there was a trade, there was always a winner and a loser from that trade. That trade benefited one party and hurt the other party. These two folks come along and say, you know, that's wrong. So Adam Smith, 1776, David Ricardo, 1815. And the reason that they say this is simple. The trades we make are voluntary. When I decide to go to Subway and spend some money and buy a sandwich, or farmers in the United States sell soybeans to cattle producers in China, those are voluntary exchanges. Nobody forces me to go to Subway, and if I walked into Subway and they had raised their prices and a sub was $10, I'm walking out. There's no law that says I have to buy that sandwich if I don't think it's worth it. Okay? Same with the farmers. There's no... The people in China are buying our soybeans because they need soybeans to feed their cattle, and our soybeans are available, high quality, good price. They buy them. Trade is voluntary. Because trades are voluntary, both sides win. You wouldn't engage in a trade that made you worse off because you get to choose. So if both sides are better off, then the way to make everybody better off is to maximize the amount of trade. There's two versions of this theory, one called absolute advantage, and that came from Adam Smith. And they didn't really, these are our names. So this theory of absolute advantage comes from Adam Smith, and the theory of comparative advantage comes from David Ricardo. Okay, so absolute advantage is simple. Absolute advantage is the idea that if you're better at making thing A and I'm better at making thing B, what should we do? Well, we shouldn't both make A and B. If I'm better at A and you're better at B, I should stop making B and just make A. And if they're better at making B than A, they should stop making A and just make B, and then we can trade. If I'm not good at something, I'm not going to make it very efficiently, and I'm better off making something that I can make efficiently. So imagine that you start up a business, and you and a friend are starting this business. Your friend's a great cabinet maker. You're the whiz-bang salesperson. So there's two of you, and there's two things that need done. You need to make the cabinets, and you need to sell the cabinets. Should both people do both things? No. The one who's really good at making the cabinet should make the cabinets. The one who's really good at selling stuff should sell stuff. And that way, the partnership will produce the best results. Do we agree? Same thing true for a country. If the United States is good at something and China is good at something, we should specialize and work really hard at what we're good at. We should hope that they specialize, work really hard at what they're good at, and then we trade with each other. This is absolute advantage. Both parties are better at something than the other. What David Ricardo showed us is comparative advantage. David Ricardo showed that even if one country is better at everything than the other country, they should still specialize in trade. So imagine you have the doctor here down the bottom of our screen. She's a better doctor than the staff who works in her front office, so she should be doctor and stuff. But she's also probably better at doing the paperwork, and if she worked in the front office, she'd probably do a better job in the front office then. So does that mean because she's better at her front office job than her front office workers, she should only doctor half the day and do paperwork the other half of the day? No, that makes no sense, right? She should specialize in what she's really the best at, where she can make the most money. She should hire other people who aren't as good as her, but she's still going to be better off, right? If you only doctor half a day, you only make money half a day. If you're the doctor the whole day, you can afford to pay some staff to work for you, and you still probably end up making more money. Okay? So comparative advantage says even if you're better at everything, you still shouldn't try to do everything. You should figure out what you're the best at and specialize in what you're the best at. Okay? Can we demonstrate mathematically that trade can make everyone better off? Indeed, we can. So it's not something we usually do in macro class. It's something we do in micro class. But we can go through and mathematically show that we can make everybody better off when we trade. Can make. It doesn't necessarily mean that always is the way it works. But we can make everybody better off if we trade. Okay? But remember, to gain from trade, we have to specialize. It doesn't do us any good, does not do us any good to try to do everything. A country should specialize in what that country is good at. How expensive would it be for us to try to grow coffee and chocolate and tea in the United States? Right? We grow a little bit of that stuff in Hawaii, but really, how expensive would it be to try to figure out a way in the United States to grow all this food that comes from tropical places, to grow bananas, to grow... It's way better for us to specialize in things we're good at and then trade with countries that are good at making coffee and good at making tea and good at making chocolate. Okay? All right. And then the point is you have to trade, and the more you trade, the more better off you'll be. So you specialize, and then you try to trade as much as you can. Right? The more you trade, the more better off you'll be. Now, the trick here is that this has to be free and fair trade. It can't be that one side in this deal is playing with the other side and not treating them fairly in the bargain. Okay? For this to work, both sides have to be playing the game by the rules, right? If you're playing Monopoly and your little sister's the banker, and every time she crosses go, she's sliding a few extra hundreds into her stack, it's not going to work out too well for you. Okay? So, in the upper right-hand corner of this screen is the people who signed something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. We were supposed to sign the TPP, but we didn't. 2 points of that we'll make, and we'll come back and talk about some of this stuff again. But one is that because we didn't sign the TPP, Welch's can't sell grape juice in Japan anymore. That the TPP changed the terms of trade between the U.S. and Japan relative to Chile and other countries that grow grapes, and Welch's can't sell grape juice into Japan anymore because we are not part of that deal. The other side of that is that we redid something called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And in its place, there's going to be something called the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement, which should be the Marine Corps. USMCA is the Marine Corps. But the trick to this deal, and as I is speaking to you, it hasn't been formally approved by Congress, but I assume it's going to be. Okay? This deal, we got out of the TPP because we didn't like it, and yet the new USMCA copies much of the language word for word straight out of the TPP. So they just copied this TPP that they said they didn't like and turned it into the USMCA to replace NAFTA. Now, what's the deal? Why did we not do the TPP and why did we redo NAFTA? Well, one reason that we ditched the TPP, and probably the primary reason we ditched the TPP, is that it's hard to enforce. What's the enforcement mechanism? How do you make sure that when you set up these rules, that countries like China actually follow the rules? And the sense was that there was no way to make sure China was following the rules. Okay? Why'd we redo the North American Free Trade Agreement? Well, the North American Free Trade Agreement is old. It was negotiated in the 90s. And it doesn't take into account things like intellectual property. So patents and copyrights weren't protected very well by the USMCA. So we took the language from TPP that protected patents and copyrights. So by not being in TPP, we don't have that added patent and copyright protection with China and other countries. And we're trying to negotiate that now separately. Okay? But it's all about, can we make people follow it? Can we make them treat us fair? Can we make them not steal our patent technology or whatever? Okay? So when you hear these trade disputes, the trade dispute is, are we treating each other fair? Do we have an agreement? And then how do you make sure we follow the agreement? There's a new agreement that we're just put together with China, and you know, they only have to do stuff. They agreed to do some stuff, but only for 2 years and only if market conditions. We're still in that boat of how do you know they're going to comply or not comply? Okay? All right. So how do we make our economy work? Economic coordination. The picture on the right there is the old Soviet Union. In their system, the government tightly controlled what happened. The government said to each person, this is your job, and that was your job. You got to do the job that the government said you should do. Factories did what the government told them to do. Right? We believe this system was highly inefficient, and we'll maybe talk about that a little bit more here. Our system, that's us on the left, is different. Our system is based on this idea that there are independent businesses out there. They get to make their own choices. Imagine there's 30 million businesses in the United States. You don't have to imagine that. It's actually true. So there's 30 million businesses in the United States. Imagine if the government had to try to figure out what they were going to buy, what they were going to make, and what they were going to sell to. So you're a steel mill. Where are your ingredients coming from? And can you get those ingredients out of the ground and whatever? Who's going to do that? How are those going to be transported to the steel mill? What products does the steel mill have to make? There's all kinds of different kinds of steel. There's all kinds of different kinds of shape. What does the steel mill need to produce? And then who's it going to sell to? Imagine somebody up in the government is having to make all of those decisions for 30 million businesses. All right? It's just not going to work very well. Works a lot better if all of those 30 million businesses get to make decisions about what they're going to do. And some of them are going to decide poorly, and some of them are going to decide well. But they can decide, right? The steel mill can say, hey, we're going to get my coal from this company, and if that company can't provide it or does something wrong, I can go to another one. Individual businesses are making choices. So we've distributed that decision-making process from being one little government agency to being 30 million businesses. It's probably going to work a lot better. Okay? And how do they know what's going on and whether it's right or wrong? Well, we work through markets, right? In our system, there's markets, there's buyers and sellers, and the buyers and sellers are negotiating and trying to figure out how to make those best exchanges. The steel mill has to figure out what to do. Nike has to figure out what shoes they're going to sell and hope that the shoes they pick are the shoes the consumers want. And if the shoes they make aren't right, then maybe you're buying New Balance or maybe you're buying Adidas. And so competition is, in this marketplace, is helping businesses make decisions. It's helping consumers make decisions. There isn't a need for some entity up above us all to tell us what to do. We get to figure it out. And yeah, maybe I buy a pair of shoes and I go, that was not the pair of shoes I should have bought. But then next time I don't buy them. Okay? Markets. We also use money to coordinate, and that's something we'll talk about quite a bit later on in class. This works because we have property rights. People own things, and they can sign contracts. Adam Smith thought that the most, or at least one of the most important functions of government, one of the few functions of government he thought were allowable, is the idea that the government needs to enforce property rights. That if there's a contract between you and somebody else, there needs to be an entity that can make sure that contract is followed. Again, that's the problem between the U.S. and China is we think we have agreements and we think they're not following them, and there's no way for us to go make them follow us. Okay? Where in the U.S. of A., if I have a contract with a company to come paint my house and they paint half my house and take all the money, I can go get a lawyer and go deal with that because I have a property right and I have a contract. Okay? So part of what happens in our economic system is that by giving people property rights, and a lot of the problems that we have, problems like pollution and overfishing and all this kind of stuff, exist because people don't have property rights over things. Nobody owns the river, and so lots of people dump stuff in the river because nobody owns it. If I owned the river, I could get the police and come get you for dumping stuff in my river, but it's not my river. Okay? And again, most of this stuff works through prices as well. The signals that we get of what to do come from prices. If prices are falling, that tells us one thing. If prices are rising, that tells us something else. Okay? And the price might be my price. It might be my wage, my salary. That's a form of a price. All right? So we're coordinating our economic system, markets, property rights, prices. All right? It's fun, yes?